They shoved the termination papers in front of me right before $20 million hit the company's account. I knew exactly where that money was going. And I knew exactly how to stop it. The envelope sat on the polished table like a loaded gun. Across from me, Grant Ellison, CEO of Dominion Strategies, leaned back in his chair as though this were a formality. Beside him, Vice President Marjorie Keene flipped through a folder, not even pretending to look me in the eye. "Savannah," Ellison said, his voice smooth, almost bored, "we appreciate your contributions. But the company needs a different direction moving forward." Different direction. Right. That was their glossy way of saying, "You're out." I stared at the papers, then at him. A different direction? Funny, because the one I led just delivered you $20 million this morning. Keene's pen froze mid-tap. Ellison's jaw twitched, but he didn't rise to the bait. He slid the envelope closer. "This is final." I didn't touch it. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and let the silence work against them. Through the glass wall, I could see analysts hurrying by with trays of champagne flutes. Celebration in full swing, without me. I forced a thin smile. "So who gets my seat? Another relative of Marjorie's, or are we trying interns now?" Keene finally looked up, her eyes sharp as glass. Ellison's hand tightened around his pen. I hit a nerve. Good. But the show was over. I stood, picked up my notebook, and tucked it under my arm. Not the glossy company-issued binder, but the one I'd filled with copies of emails, drafts, and side agreements they thought I'd deleted. The envelope of severance money sat untouched on the table. I pushed it back toward Ellison with one finger. "Keep it. Buy yourself a conscience." His phone buzzed. I caught the faintest flicker of a smile at the corner of his mouth. The $20 million had cleared. For him, it was a victory. For me, it was gasoline. I left the room without another word. Past cubicles buzzing with fluorescent light, past the break room where corks were popping, past the receptionist who couldn't meet my eyes. Inside the elevator, the doors slid shut. My reflection stared back, hair slightly undone, blazer crooked, but eyes sharp and unbroken. They thought I'd vanish quietly. They thought this was the end. But they'd just handed me the start of something much bigger. Walking out with a cardboard box is the modern corporate walk of shame. I never thought I'd do it, but there I was, Savannah Lowe, 5 years of flawless reviews and record-breaking deals, reduced to balancing a stapler, a coffee mug, and a dying desk plant in my arms. The cubicle farm was buzzing. Fluorescent lights hummed, phones rang, keyboards clicked. And yet, somehow, every single head seemed tilted just enough to catch a glimpse of me passing. Some looked away quickly, pretending to be busy. Others whispered behind hands. I'd seen this scene before, dozens of times, when it happened to someone else. I just never thought I'd be the main character. As I reached my old desk, I saw the email notification flash across the shared screen in the middle of the floor. Payment confirmed. $20 million received. Big bold numbers, glowing on the monitor like a sick joke. Laughter erupted a few cubicles down. Someone popped another cork. That money should have been my victory. My late nights, my weekends, my headaches and spreadsheets. I'd carried that contract from draft to signature like it was a fragile newborn. And now it was their party. Without me. I stacked the last of my notebooks into the box. A colleague I barely knew, Ethan from accounting, hovered nearby, shifting uncomfortably. "Savannah, I didn't know they were gonna." "Don't worry," I cut him off. My voice was steady, but my hands weren't. "You'll still get your champagne." He looked like he wanted to say more, but he didn't. No one ever does. When I reached the break room, the smell of cheap sparkling wine hit me. The whole team was crammed inside, glasses in hand, laughing too loudly. At the center, of course, was Marjorie Keene, raising her glass like she was queen of the world. "To the future," she shouted. I stood at the doorway, clutching my box, watching the celebration unfold like a scene from a movie I wasn't cast in. Someone glanced at me and nudged the person next to them. The laughter dropped a notch, awkward tension slipping into the room. Marjorie noticed. She turned, glass raised in my direction. "Oh, Savannah," she said, her smile wide and fake, "don't look so gloomy. You'll land on your feet." It was the kind of line designed to humiliate. To show the others I'd been dismissed, erased, downgraded to a cautionary tale. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Thanks, Marjorie. I'll drink to your success, when you earn it." Gasps, muffled laughter, a couple of coughs. Her face tightened for a second before she turned back to the group, pretending it didn't sting. But I knew it did. I didn't stay to watch. I shifted the box in my arms and kept walking. Out of the office. Down the long corridor with its buzzing exit signs. Into the elevator, where no one followed. By the time I reached the parking garage, the weight of it all hit me. Not just the box in my arms, but the betrayal pressing against my chest. I dropped the box into the back seat of my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the concrete wall in front of me. They thought they'd buried me under paperwork and humiliation. They thought I'd go quietly. But I still had my notebook. I still had my copies. And I still had more access to their system than they realized. The champagne was theirs tonight. But the reckoning, that was mine to deliver. My apartment looked like a crime scene after a robbery, papers scattered across the kitchen table, laptop open, coffee cup forgotten and cold. I'd been sitting there for hours, replaying every detail of that meeting, every smug look on Ellison's face, every fake smile from Keane. But anger has a way of sharpening focus. I opened my notebook, the one that never left my side. Tucked inside were emails I'd printed, copies of draft agreements, and screenshots I'd quietly sent to myself before they cut off my access. Most people delete this stuff. I hoard it. Call it paranoia or call it foresight. Tonight, it felt like the latter. On page 7, highlighted in yellow, was the clause Ellison didn't want anyone to notice. A consulting fee buried under vague language. $2 million disguised as an external service charge. I traced the line with my finger and smiled. That wasn't going to consulting. That was a slush fund. I dug deeper. My laptop fan-whirred as I flipped through folders I'd mirrored onto a private drive. Payment schedules, calendar invites, side notes from the client. Everything pointed to the same conclusion. Ellison and Keane were diverting money before the ink was even dry. I leaned back in my chair. $20 million had hit the account that morning, and already a chunk was being siphoned. They hadn't fired me because I was replaceable. They'd fired me because I was watching too closely. The realization hit like caffeine to the bloodstream. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I landed on a name I hadn't called in years, Tessa Vaughn. Law school friend turned corporate attorney. If anyone could help me frame this legally, it was her. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Savannah? Wow, it's been forever. What's going on? I hesitated, then let the words spill. I think my CEO just stole millions, and he fired me to keep me quiet. Silence. Then a sharp intake of breath. Tell me everything. For the next 30 minutes, I laid it all out, the contract, the termination, the suspicious clauses. Tessa listened, interrupting only to ask for details. By the end, her voice was firm. You need to be careful. Don't do anything illegal. But if you have the documents, you might have leverage. Leverage. The word hummed in my head like electricity. After hanging up, I called the only other person I trusted with this kind of mess, Colton Briggs. A former IT guy from Dominion, fired last year after clashing with Keane. He owed her no favors. Savannah, he said when he answered, what trouble are you about to drag me into? The kind that pays back $20 million, I replied. He laughed, low and rough. I'm listening. By the time I closed my laptop that night, the plan wasn't clear yet. But the spark was there. A network forming. The pieces beginning to align. Ellison thought he'd erase me with a piece of paper. But I was just getting started. The next morning, I wasn't just unemployed. I was on a mission. I sat in a corner booth at a quiet cafe downtown, laptop open, documents spread like puzzle pieces across the table. The espresso was bitter, but it kept my head sharp. My notebook lay beside me, the pages dog-eared and scrawled with notes. The place smelled of burnt beans and lemon-scented cleaner, nothing glamorous, but perfect for planning. First call was Tessa Vaughn. She met me there, her tailored blazer making her look like she'd just stepped out of a courtroom drama. She slid into the booth, glanced at the chaos on the table, and raised an eyebrow. You weren't kidding, she said. This is a mess. It's more than a mess, I said. It's theft. $2 million disguised as consulting fees, and I'm sure that's just the start. Tessa leaned in, lowering her voice. If you want to use this, it has to be airtight. No speculation. No gaps. Every claim has to be backed up by a document. I tapped my notebook. That's why I've been saving everything. She smirked. Paranoia finally pays off. Next came Colton Briggs. He arrived late, carrying a laptop bag that looked like it had survived a war. He slid in beside Tessa, dropped the bag with a thud, and gave me a lopsided grin. All right, Lowe, he said. What kind of digital grave digging are we talking about? I explained what I had: drafts, schedules, suspicious clauses. Colton listened, then cracked open his laptop. If they thought wiping my access last year was enough, they're idiots. I left back doors. Logs, emails, badge records, I can pull them all. Tessa shot him a warning look. Stay legal, Colton. He waved her off. Relax. I know the line. I'll just walk right up to it. The three of us leaned over the table, piecing together a strategy. Tessa would make sure everything I gathered was legally admissible. Colton would dig through digital trails. My job was to keep collecting evidence from the shadows, archives, notes, anything that proved Ellison and Keene were bleeding money out of the company. By the time the sun dipped below the buildings outside, the plan was clear: build a wall of evidence, then decide where to drop it: board of directors, auditors, or maybe both. As we packed up, Tessa touched my arm. Savannah, you need to understand. Once you start this, there's no turning back. Ellison isn't the kind of man who forgives. I met her eyes. Good. Neither am I. We left separately, blending into the evening crowds. I walked to my car in the dimly lit garage, the sound of my footsteps echoing against concrete. My box of office junk still sat in the back seat, a reminder of the humiliation. I opened my notebook, glanced at the highlighted lines one more time, and closed it with a snap. This wasn't just about 20 million anymore. It was about burning their empire down with their own paperwork. The Dominion Strategies parking garage was never truly quiet. Even late at night, you could hear the drip of condensation hitting concrete, the squeak of a loose air vent, the low rumble of the building's generators buried somewhere below. It was the perfect place to disappear for a few minutes without anyone noticing. I slipped inside with my old employee badge. They hadn't deactivated it yet, amateurs. That tiny oversight told me everything I needed to know. Ellison and Keene were so high on their $20 million victory that they'd forgotten the basics. I moved quickly, keeping my head down as if I still belonged there. I knew the security cameras, the blind spots, the rhythm of the night shift. Years of late evenings had turned this building into my second home, and now it was my hunting ground. The server room was 2 floors up, but I didn't need to go that far. Colton had taught me enough tricks to know that the real gold often hid in the simplest places: badge reader logs, shared calendars, printer histories. Most people didn't even realize how much they gave away just by swiping in and out of doors or rescheduling meetings. I found a workstation in an unused corner office. My login credentials were already dead, but Colton had prepped me. I plugged in the small flash drive he'd given me. Within seconds, it opened a portal straight into the company's internal logs. And there it was. Calendar records, meetings marked as strategy review, but cross-referenced against emails. They were actually private sessions between Ellison, Keene, and a mysterious consultant. Badge logs, doors opened at odd hours, always by the same few cards. One belonged to Keene, another to a card labeled Temp Access. No name, just a number. Printer history, contracts printed at midnight, reprinted with small but critical changes the next morning. Someone had been altering documents after the fact. I copied everything, my heart pounding as the progress bar crawled across the screen. Every beep of the server felt like a warning. Any second, a security guard could walk by, ask me what I was doing. But no one came. When the flash drive finally ejected, I slipped it into my notebook and exhaled slowly. This wasn't speculation anymore. These were hard logs. Proof that Ellison and Keene weren't just unethical, they were sloppy criminals hiding behind glass walls and leather chairs. I exited the office the same way I came in: quiet, steady, invisible. Back in my car, I called Colton. He picked up on the second ring. Tell me you got something. I got more than something, I whispered. Logs. Calendars. Midnight contracts. They're moving money under a ghost consultant. He whistled. That's textbook laundering. You just handed me the thread to unravel their sweater. Good, I said, because I want the whole thing to fall apart. I ended the call, leaned back in my seat, and stared at the dark ceiling of the garage. The box of office junk was still in the back, but it felt different now. Less like baggage, more like fuel. They thought firing me was the end of the story. But tonight, the leak had begun. The archives always smelled the same: dust, toner, and the faint chemical bite of cleaning fluid that never quite masked the age of the place. Dominion Strategies liked to pretend everything was digital and cutting edge, but the truth lived in paper. Stacks of it. Boxes of it. Years of contracts shoved into steel cabinets no one touched unless absolutely necessary. That's why I was there. I still had a spare key. Technically, I was supposed to return it on my last day, but HR never checked. Another oversight. Another advantage. The flickering motion sensor lights buzzed to life as I stepped in, casting pale cones across rows of cabinets. Each drawer was labeled in neat block letters: client agreements, vendor contracts, personnel files. To most, it was clutter. To me, it was gold. I pulled open a heavy drawer and started digging. My fingers moved quickly, flipping through file after file until I landed on the one I wanted: Marlowe Energy contract. That was the deal tied to the $20 million. Inside were the original drafts, handwritten notes in the margins, dates that didn't match, signatures that looked suspiciously off. I laid the documents flat across a nearby table and compared them to the digital copies I had saved. Small differences jumped out like neon signs. A decimal shifted here. A clause rephrased there. The kind of subtle changes that wouldn't raise a red flag unless you were looking. And I was. By the time I reached the back of the folder, I found the smoking gun. An addendum, slipped in after the official signing, marked with Keen's initials. The addendum authorized an expedited consulting service at twice the market rate, exactly the same line item I'd highlighted before. $2 million. Disguised. Approved. Signed. I snapped photos of every page, careful to capture the stamps, the initials, the faint indentations from someone's pen pressing too hard. Evidence wasn't just the words, it was the marks around them. As I worked, I thought about the way Ellison had smiled when his phone buzzed with the payment notification. The way Keen had lifted her glass in the break room like she'd earned it. They believed the paper trail was buried too deep for anyone to follow. But here I was, tracing it line by line. I loaded the files back into the cabinet, making sure nothing looked disturbed. Then I slipped out of the archive room, locking the door behind me. Back in my apartment later that night, I spread the photos across my computer screen. The pieces were falling into place. Contracts altered after signing, addendums smuggled into files, fake consulting fees to cover the transfer of millions. Colton pinged me on an encrypted chat. "Colton, you alive?" Me, more than alive. "I've got their fingerprints all over this." Colton, send copies. I'll cross-check with the badge logs. See who was in the archive when those files were swapped. I uploaded everything. The progress bar ticked across the screen, slow and deliberate, like a countdown. For the first time since they shoved that envelope across the table, I felt something shift. This wasn't desperation anymore. This was control. Offices have a strange way of changing when rumors start to spread. The same corridors, the same cubicles, the same break room, but suddenly the air feels heavier, conversations sharper, glances quicker. Dominion Strategies was no exception. I wasn't there anymore, but word travels. Tessa had a paralegal who still worked in the building. She passed along whispers. Ellison was on edge, Keen was holding closed-door meetings, and junior staff were suddenly very careful about what they said in the hallways. Nobody knew why, not yet. But the silence between the whispers was louder than any celebration they'd had. From my apartment window, I watched the city lights flicker and thought about how quickly power flips. Just a week ago, I was the one walking through those halls with my head down, pretending not to hear the gossip. Now I was the one planting it. Colton confirmed the badge logs matched my theory. Keen had been in the archives after hours on the same nights the contracts were altered. Not her assistant. Not a junior analyst. Her. She'd been sloppy enough to leave her digital fingerprints everywhere. "Ellison's too careful to swipe in himself," Colton said on our late-night call. But her? She wanted control. That's arrogance we can use. Tessa, meanwhile, was piecing the evidence into something clean enough for a courtroom. She was meticulous, cross-referencing dates, highlighting inconsistencies, drafting timelines. "You don't just want suspicion, Savannah," she warned. "You need certainty. Solid facts. If you hit them with anything less, they'll bury you." The silence wasn't just inside Dominion's walls. It was in me too. Those hours between gathering evidence and making the next move stretched long and thin. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning, notebook still on my nightstand, pages glowing faintly under the streetlight. Each detail I reread felt like a loaded weapon waiting to fire. I knew Ellison felt it too. He wasn't stupid. A man like him could sense when someone was circling his empire. And I had no doubt Keen had whispered my name more than once behind those closed doors. But they didn't know how much I had. Not yet. The silence before the storm is always the most dangerous part. People get careless. They underestimate the threat. And in that silence, I was sharpening every piece of evidence into a blade they wouldn't see coming. I wasn't collecting scraps anymore. I had enough to hurt them. Now it was about how to use it. Tessa's advice was clear: no leaks, no threats, no noise until the package was airtight. Ellison would crush half-baked accusations, but he couldn't ignore documents that spoke for themselves. I started laying out the trap. Step 1. Build a timeline. Every altered contract, every after-hours badge swipe, every suspicious payment. Colton synced the logs with my scanned documents. The pattern was obvious, keen in the archives at night, addendums appearing the next morning, funds wired days later. Step 2. Isolate the trigger. We knew 20 million had landed, but the full contract was structured for more. The next installment, 30 million, was scheduled in less than 2 weeks. That was our pressure point. Step 3. Decide the battlefield. Tessa argued for the board of directors. They won't protect him if the evidence is clear. Too much money at risk. She was right. The board had more loyalty to profit than to Ellison. But I wanted Ellison to feel it before the board did. I drafted a summary packet, clean, concise, impossible to ignore. Not the full arsenal, just enough to show the cracks. The idea was simple: drop it where it couldn't be traced back to me, let paranoia do the rest. Colton set up a ghost email address. The first anonymous message went to Dominion's internal compliance team. Attached, a redacted calendar record showing Keen's midnight meeting labeled consultant, and a copy of the addendum approving inflated fees. We didn't wait long for a reaction. By the next morning, Dominion was buzzing. Compliance had quietly opened an inquiry. Keen was seen storming through the office with her phone pressed to her ear. Ellison, for the first time, closed his office blinds. The trap wasn't sprung yet, but they were already tangled in the wires. I kept my movements tight. No unnecessary calls. No visible excitement. Every step was calculated. When I met Tessa later that night, she leaned across the table. You understand, once the board sees this, there's no going back. Ellison will know it's you. I didn't hesitate. Good. Let him know. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch them walk straight into it. The first email rattled them. The second one shook them. By the third, Ellison knew someone was pulling strings. It didn't take long for him to move. Dominion's IT department ran an emergency sweep, locking down accounts, resetting passwords, combing through logs. Colton called me as soon as the alerts hit. They're hunting the leak, he said. Ellison's paranoid. He's pushing compliance to trace IPs. They won't find me, but he's not going to stop. I expected it. Men like Ellison don't sit still when they smell smoke. They try to stomp it out, even if they burn down the floor in the process. By midday, I got my own message, an official notice from Dominion's legal department. A warning, dressed up in polite corporate language: return any company property, delete all confidential documents, or face consequences. It wasn't a request. It was intimidation. I forwarded it to Tessa. She replied 2 minutes later: do not respond. They can't touch you without proof. Meanwhile, inside Dominion, Keen was unraveling. Reports filtered back through Tessa's paralegal. She was interrogating staff, demanding to know who had access to archives, calling emergency meetings with department heads. Her panic was useful. The more she flailed, the more she exposed. Ellison played it colder. He sent out a company-wide memo about maintaining integrity and standing strong through external distractions. Classic damage control. But his closed blinds and canceled calendar entries told a different story. The pushback wasn't just legal threats and memos. That night, as I pulled into my apartment garage, I noticed a black SUV idling near the exit. Tinted windows. Engine running. Not unusual in a city, but it stayed there after I parked. Too still. Too patient. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, heart steady, notebook under my arm. If Ellison thought he could scare me with shadows, he underestimated how much I'd already lost. Upstairs, I called Colton. They're watching. He didn't laugh. Then you're closer than I thought. Pushback was proof the trap was working. They weren't in control anymore. They were reacting. And once Ellison was forced to play defense, I knew he'd start making mistakes. Ellison's empire ran on deadlines. Contracts, transfers, board meetings, everything chained to the calendar. That was about to be his weakness. Colton pulled the payment schedule. Next transfer is 30 million. 12 days from now. If we don't stop it, it's gone. That gave us a timer. Tessa's strategy was clear. The evidence had to be packaged and in the board's hands before the money moved. Once funds cleared, Ellison could bury the trail under fake vendors and offshore accounts. Every day mattered. Day 1. Colton dug deeper into logs. He traced the temp access badge used for midnight archive visits. It was created under Keene's credentials, but authorized by Ellison himself. That tied them together. Day 2. I retrieved copies of expense reports from my old contacts. Hidden inside, inflated invoices from shell companies. Names generic, addresses fake. Classic laundering fronts. Day 3. Tessa drafted a legal summary. No fluff, no speculation, just signatures, timestamps, and dollar amounts. She built it like a blade, designed to cut through excuses. Day 4. Compliance at Dominion went quiet. No memos, no updates. Which meant Ellison had shut them down. Proof he was buying time. Day 6. A text from Colton saw Keene leaving the office at 3 a.m. Same SUV spotted. They weren't sleeping. They were scrambling. By day 8, the silence inside Dominion was louder than celebration. Staff avoided eye contact, projects stalled, meetings canceled. The $20 million victory was rotting from the inside. Day 10. Tessa looked me dead in the eye. We drop this to the board tomorrow. If they stall, we take it outside. Regulators, auditors, whoever listens first. The countdown was real now. 30 million sat on the horizon like a time bomb. Ellison thought he could run out the clock. But I was already holding the detonator. The board of directors met every other Thursday at 7 a.m. sharp. Ellison liked to brag that he never missed a session. This time, he'd wish he had. Tessa and I sat in her office the night before, finalizing the packet. Every page was numbered, cross-referenced, stamped with dates. No speculation. Just hard evidence. Altered contracts, badge logs, inflated invoices. Once they see this, she said, sliding the binder across the table, Ellison's credibility is done. Keene too. Colton had already lined up the delivery. At 6:30 a.m., anonymous envelopes would land on each director's desk. By the time Ellison walked in, the trap would already be live. Morning came fast. I wasn't in the room, but I had eyes inside. Tessa's paralegal texted updates from the hallway. 6:45, directors are here. They're opening the packets. 6:52, whispers. Lots of page flipping. Ellison isn't here yet. 6:58, Keene just arrived. Looks pale. 7:03, Ellison walked in. Stopped when he saw the binders. Silence. I could picture it, the long polished table, Ellison taking his usual seat at the head, trying to smile, trying to talk over the noise of documents slamming shut. The first director spoke. Not a question, not a greeting. Just one sentence. Grant, explain this. According to the paralegal, Ellison stalled. He blamed clerical errors, miscommunications, creative accounting. But the evidence was too clean, too precise. And Keene, cornered, kept quiet. By 7:30, the board had called for an independent audit. Ellison's authority was cracked. At 7:45, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, enjoying the show? Ellison knew. He couldn't prove it, but he knew. I typed back, this is only the beginning. The boardroom play was complete. The directors had the evidence. The audit was coming. And Ellison was finally bleeding. Ellison never took a hit without swinging back. The morning after the board meeting, the retaliation began. First came the smear. An anonymous email circulated through Dominion staff, former employee Savannah Lowe under investigation for data theft. No proof, no sources, just enough to plant doubt. Tessa forwarded it to me with a single line, he's desperate. Then came the pressure. My phone lit up with calls from blocked numbers. Silence on the line, then clicks. Classic intimidation tactics. I stopped answering after the fifth one. By noon, Keene made her move. Dominion's PR department released a statement, allegations currently under review. A disgruntled ex-employee has attempted to discredit the company's leadership. My name wasn't printed, but everyone could connect the dots. Colton called. His voice was sharp. They're trying to isolate you. Make you look unstable so the board ignores the evidence. I clenched the phone. Then we tightened the evidence. But Ellison didn't stop there. That night, when I checked my building's lobby, a courier envelope was waiting with no return address. Inside, a cease and desist letter drafted by Dominion's lawyers. Pages of legal jargon demanding I surrender all documents illegally obtained. I dropped the stack on my kitchen counter and laughed. The irony was too sharp to ignore, Ellison accusing me of theft while his own signature bled across falsified contracts. Still, Tessa warned me to stay sharp. He's not trying to win in court. He's trying to scare you into silence. But fear wasn't an option anymore. That same evening, Colton confirmed something new. Ellison had ordered internal IT to trace the anonymous leaks. They're burning hours trying to break into systems I've already firewalled. They're not going to find me. But it proves one thing. What? I asked. He's panicking. The counterstrike was loud, messy, desperate. The kind of move you make when the walls start closing in. And I knew what came next. When intimidation fails, Ellison would try to buy me off. Ellison's smear campaign bought him time, but not enough. Colton's digging finally hit bedrock. Check this out, he said, dropping a file into our encrypted chat. Badge logs from the archive room. Midnight entries. Guess who? I opened the file. The data was clear. Keen's access card, swiping in at 12:14 a.m. 3 nights in a row. Each visit matched perfectly with the altered contract dates. That's solid, I said. But Ellison will claim she acted alone. Colton grinned. Not when you pair it with this. He uploaded a second file, system approval records. The midnight badge entries weren't possible without a second sign-off. And that sign-off came from Ellison's master account. The wall cracked right there. Keen wasn't freelancing. She was executing Ellison's orders. I sent the files to Tessa. 10 minutes later, she called me back. Her tone was sharp, urgent. Savannah, this is direct. It ties both of them to the same act. No deniability. The timing couldn't have been better. The independent auditors hired by the board were scheduled to start the following week. With these logs, they wouldn't just find smoke, they'd see the fire. Meanwhile, inside Dominion, the paranoia escalated. Staff were pulled into closed-door interviews. Compliance officers shuffled in and out of Ellison's office. Keen stopped showing up in the cafeteria. She was too busy trying to hold her story together. And yet, I knew Ellison. He wouldn't wait for the auditors. He'd try to cut the fuse before the explosion. That night, I got the call I'd been expecting. Savannah, Ellison's voice, calm but strained, came through the line. We should talk. Privately. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, you're running out of walls to hide behind, Grant. He didn't argue. Just replied, meet me tomorrow. My office. 8 a.m. The crack in the wall wasn't just evidence anymore. It was him, reaching out. Ellison was losing control. And now, he wanted to negotiate. Tessa didn't waste time. As soon as Colton's logs landed in her inbox, she started building the case like a surgeon sharpening scalpels. This isn't evidence anymore, she told me. This is a weapon. Her office conference table was covered in binders. Every document had a tab, every log had a timestamp. She'd cross-referenced the badge entries with contract edits, lined them up with payment transfers, and mapped them against board meeting notes. The story was airtight, Keen entering the archives at midnight, Ellison authorizing her access, falsified addendums sliding into official files, and millions siphoned into fake vendors. Tessa slid one binder toward me. If this goes to regulators, Dominion bleeds. If it stays with the board, Ellison is finished. Either way, it's checkmate. But she wasn't just thinking about Ellison. She was thinking about me. Savannah, you're in the story. They'll try to paint you as unstable, vindictive. That's why I've built this to stand without you. If you disappear tomorrow, the case still stands. It was cold, brutal, necessary. Meanwhile, Colton worked on redundancy. 3 encrypted drives, stashed in different locations. If one disappeared, 2 more survived. They can't bury this, he said. Not unless they burn down half the city. For the first time, I felt the balance shift. They had power, money, influence. But we had the trail. And once it was in the right hands, there was no stopping it. That night, as I flipped through the binder, I stopped at a single page, Ellison's digital approval, timestamped at 12:16 a.m. The exact moment Keen swiped into the archive. His name, his authority, tied to the crime. The legal weapon was finished. Clean. Sharp. Ready. The only question left was where to fire it. The auditors arrived on a Monday morning. Dominion's lobby, usually polished and silent, turned into a checkpoint. Clipboards, laptops, briefcases. No smiles. Tessa made sure the binders landed on their desks before they even started. She didn't attach my name. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. By noon, the board had called an emergency session. Allison walked in first, his stride slower than usual. Keen followed, eyes darting like she already knew what was coming. Staff whispered in corners, watching the empire wobble. Colton fed me updates from his contact inside IT. Auditors are tearing through the logs. They've already flagged the midnight entries. Allison tried to argue it was a glitch. They laughed. For the first time, Allison's charm wasn't working. He couldn't smirk his way past timestamps. He couldn't talk over signatures. The walls were closing in, and everyone could see it. By 3 p.m., Dominion stock had dipped 6%. The market smelled blood. By 5 p.m., Allison canceled all public appearances for the week. Keen was nowhere to be seen. That evening, Tessa called me. Her voice was steady but sharp. Savannah, the board is preparing to freeze executive powers. If they do, Allison won't control the next $30 million transfer. That's the crack becoming a break. I sat at my kitchen table, notebook open, binder beside me. The humiliation of that severance envelope felt like years ago. Now it was Allison who was cornered, Allison who was trying not to look weak. The turning point wasn't loud. No shouting, no fireworks. Just the quiet recognition that the man who thought he owned everything had finally lost control. And the best part? The real collapse hadn't even started yet. Allison finally broke silence. The message came through late at night, short, deliberate. We need to talk. My office. 8 a.m. I showed it to Tessa. She didn't flinch. He's cornered. He'll try to buy you. I arrived early. Dominion's lobby felt different now, tense, uncertain. The receptionist avoided eye contact. Even the security guards looked restless. Allison's office door was open when I got there. He was standing by the window, suit immaculate, tie perfectly knotted, as if the last week hadn't happened. But the tightness around his eyes gave him away. Savannah, he said smoothly, motioning to the chair opposite his desk. Sit. I didn't. He exhaled, turned, and placed a plain envelope on the desk. I can make this all disappear. No investigations. No headlines. You walk away today, and this, he tapped the envelope, is yours. I didn't move. How much? 7 figures, he said quickly. Too quickly. Enough to put this behind you. Enough to change your life. I let the silence hang, watching him sweat beneath his polished exterior. Then I stepped closer. You think I'm doing this for money? His jaw tightened. Everyone does it for money. You, me, the board, it's always money. I leaned in just enough for him to see the edge in my eyes. Then you've already lost. Because this isn't about money anymore. It's about you losing everything you thought you controlled. His smile faltered for the first time. I turned, heading for the door. Before I left, I looked back at him one last time. Keep your envelope, Grant. You'll need it for your lawyer. The confrontation was over. He hadn't bought me. He couldn't scare me. And now, Allison knew he was out of moves. Allison thought the meeting was private. What he didn't know was that my phone, tucked in my jacket pocket, had been recording the entire time. His voice, his offer, his words about 7 figures to make this disappear, all of it captured in perfect clarity. I walked out of his office with more than defiance. I walked out with a weapon. Tessa listened to the recording that afternoon. Her reaction was sharp and immediate. This kills him. He tried to bribe you to obstruct an audit. No board in the country will cover that. Colton grinned when I sent him the file. Beautiful. He just handed you the nail for his own coffin. Meanwhile, Dominion was collapsing under the weight of its own silence. Staff whispered about investigators roaming the halls. Directors were pulling confidential reports, reviewing years of contracts. Keen was spotted leaving the building in tears. But Allison still tried to project control. A company-wide email hit inboxes by evening. Ignore rumors. Dominion remains strong. Leadership is focused on growth. I almost laughed. Growth? His empire was bleeding out in real time. Instead of responding, I let the recording do the talking. Tessa drafted an anonymous memo to the board, attaching the audio file. Clean, simple, impossible to misinterpret. When they heard Allison's voice offering a bribe, it wouldn't just be suspicion anymore. It would be undeniable. That night, as I sat in my apartment, the weight shifted again. I wasn't just surviving their attacks. I was dictating the pace. They weren't hunting me, I was hunting them. The refusal wasn't just me walking away from Allison's envelope. It was me choosing the long game. And now he was trapped in it. The board didn't wait. The morning after they received the recording, Ellison's authority was stripped. At 9 a.m., Dominion released a statement, effective immediately. Executive powers of CEO Grant Ellison are suspended pending investigation. Stock price fell another 12% by noon. Inside the building, chaos reigned. Staff were pulled into interview rooms by auditors. Compliance officers swarmed through offices with boxes, collecting files and laptops. Keene tried to rally support, but no one stood beside her. Even her allies knew the tide had turned. Colton fed me live updates. Ellison's office is locked. Security changed the codes. Keene's assistant just walked out with a banker's box. Looked like she was crying. Directors are holding emergency votes. It's over. By mid-afternoon, Ellison himself was escorted out of the building. No press conference, no grand speech. Just a man in a suit walking past cameras, jaw clenched, flanked by security. Keene followed hours later. Tessa watched the footage with me on her laptop. "This is what collapse looks like," she said flatly. But for me, it wasn't just collapse. It was justice. I remembered the way Ellison had slid that envelope across the conference room table. The way Keene had toasted with champagne like I was disposable. That humiliation had fueled every step to this moment. Now, it was their humiliation on display. By evening, the headlines were everywhere. Dominion CEO suspended amid fraud probe. Vice President resigns as audit deepens. And the most satisfying part? None of it traced back to me. The board, the auditors, the evidence, they carried the weight. My name was nowhere in print. Ellison had collapsed. His empire cracked wide open. And I was standing outside, holding the silence he could never buy. I never thought I'd walk back into Dominion. Not after the box in my arms, the whispers, the humiliation. But the day after Ellison's suspension, I stepped through the glass doors again, this time without fear. The lobby was buzzing with investigators, auditors, and nervous employees. For once, no one avoided my eyes. They stared openly, some with shock, some with respect. The story had spread. I wasn't the disgruntled ex-employee anymore. I was the reason the empire cracked. Tessa had arranged my return. Not as staff, not as a pawn, but as a protected witness for the audit. I walked past security with clearance higher than Ellison's now. When I reached the main floor, silence followed me through the cubicles. The same desks where people had whispered about my firing now fell quiet as I passed. One analyst even muttered under his breath, "She did it." I didn't smile. This wasn't about glory. It was about control. The conference room where Ellison had once shoved my severance envelope at me was different now. His nameplate was gone. His chair was empty. Across the table, auditors sat with binders open, flipping through the very documents he thought he'd buried. One of the directors addressed me directly. "Ms. Lowe, thank you for your cooperation. Your evidence has been critical." Critical. The word echoed in the room. I nodded once, calm, collected. Walking out afterward, I passed the break room. The same place where Keene had toasted my erasure. Now it was deserted, half-empty bottles of champagne abandoned in the fridge, dust collecting on their labels. That was the triumph. Not the attention. Not the recognition. The silence. The empty celebration. Proof that their victory had rotted into failure. I left the building without looking back. For the first time, Dominion didn't own me. I owned the story. Ellison and Keene didn't leave Dominion like executives. They left like fugitives, escorted, silent, stripped of power. Watching the footage replayed across every news channel, I finally understood something I hadn't before. Revenge isn't about destroying someone. It's about exposing who they really are. Ellison built his empire on intimidation, Keene propped it up with arrogance, and both thought money could erase consequences. But all it took was their own signatures, their own logs, their own words to bring them down. I walked past the building one last time. The massive banner out front still read, "Dominion Strategies, Integrity, Vision, Leadership." The irony almost made me laugh. And here's the truth I carried out of all this. Power isn't in the title on the door, or the zeros in the contract. Power is in knowing where the cracks are and not being afraid to press until the whole wall collapses. So let me ask you this. If it were you in my place, humiliated, erased, written off, would you have walked away quietly? Or would you have done what I did? Because in the end, every story lives as long as it is remembered. A like is your mark on the story, and a subscription is your ticket to the next one.